Sabrina the Animated Series, Episode 64. It starts by boring me and ripping off James Bond. I don't recognize these characters, so I don't care about the story until I see Harvey. If this is seriously gonna waste the whole episode plagiarizing James Bond... Oh good, it's not the whole episode. Harvey was just dreaming. He's able enough to jump on Sabrina's bed when she's just waking up. He wants her to go to a spy movie with him. She again has no good chemistry with him by not caring about him raving about a movie. He didn't even let her stop for breakfast. He says there's no point to living without this new movie he has to wait just a week for. He's always bouncing between different franchises he's obsessed with. What does she see in him? He cares about everything but her. Why doesn't he hear her and Salem talk in the next room? The ants are gonna take karate lessons. Zelda wastes time telling her because magic isn't the solution for everything, and that Harvey needs to grow up and learn to deal with disappointment. She uses magic, and finally I see Sabrina indirectly call out the ants on being hypocrites. And I see Zelda react and say, "Do as I say, not as I do." Why is Sabrina trusting Spooky? And it doesn't matter that she's whispering, he'd still look at her and walk over to her. And she stops whispering anyways. She wants Spooky to make the spy movie release in theaters again earlier. I have to assume that she's warped to Spooky's dimension for a bit. How insecure is she thinks she can't do this herself? She doesn't even say that. Spooky changes the whole world to be like the spy movie out of sadism. Harvey asks why he's in a suit along with Sabrina. He tells her to finish the movie to finish the spell. Harvey would hear this. I've never watched a James Bond movie. Does it have a lot of violence in it? She better hope it's a G-rated version of it. Then he gets scared at seeing scientists in a huge room behind the fridge. Harvey doesn't care that Sabrina is being mad at her cookie jar. So why doesn't Sabrina ever use magic on Spooky until he reverses the spell? I assume she just doesn't want to deal with him using magic on her, but then she could just tell her aunts what he did to her. They never punish her for using it. Hilda used it herself. They run away scared from paintballs and hug. Harvey uses an umbrella to bounce it back. At least the paintballs is creative. Then the writer makes a guy who's using a hose get tied up. Harvey says this is a dream, and Quigley is being used to give them exposition that they need to stop an organization of bad guys. They stand on a manhole cover that takes an inexplicably long time to fall down like an elevator. I really, seriously do not care about the story. The only way it could have been exciting was if Sabrina was constantly using magic. Why is Harvey being with her ruining it? He thinks this is a dream, so she would have thought she could get away with revealing she's a witch. I guess she thinks that he'd still be terrified of her. And this is totally not worth experiencing for a few seconds just to have the spy movie get finished much earlier. The exposition is too boring to be memorable. Do they have to get a MacGuffin? Then Sabrina should just warp it to her to end the movie. Same goes if you replace MacGuffin with person. Gadgets get shown off, but the heroes don't need them to be used to survive. They have plot armor. At least the effects are interesting. It sure would be lame if they never used those gadgets though. Harvey's given something useless, and Quig somehow thinks he'd get to use it in a rare situation. That logic could be used to justify him saddling him with any object. Then the story gets boring with nothing happening and cringy when a square dance with a lame singer starts happening. I know padding. Sabrina gets glared at by the audience, and they're threatened by her aunts who waste time doing lame poses, so Sabrina lampshades it. What was the point of Spooky getting her aunts involved in this? I guess for extra sadism. But if he really wanted to be sadistic, he would have had her aunts actually fight her, and we get to see her punch them. Why didn't he have Quigley fight Sabrina? Harvey makes a pathetic excuse that it'd be lame if the fight scene didn't last very long to excuse all the lame poses. But this isn't a fight scene because they aren't attacking anyone. She also wastes time telling Salem he's under a spell, but he doesn't trust her enough to believe her, naturally because she doesn't explain what spell. Why doesn't she brainwash him? And Sabrina tells Salem with bad acting something that interests him. so I assume that she wants her stuff to be taken. Sleeping gas knocks her out, and she and Harvey get stuck in a giant litter box. I hate this episode. What's the point if she's barely gonna use magic? I wonder if this plot was stolen from something beat for beat, but with a trap replaced with kitty litter. Even Sabrina knows about the James Bond stupidity trope already. And Salem plays it straight because Spooky wanted to be a James Bond movie to the letter. At least the story wants to parody James Bond by mocking it a few times. But it's not much of a mockery if it keeps playing it straight instead of subverting it to be interesting. Sabrina uses the chicken whistle to summon chickens and save their lives. Chekhov's guns are always good, but I have to assume it's a magic chicken whistle, because there's no reason the chickens would just appear. They're not near a chicken farm. They weren't being followed by chickens the whole time, or people would have commented on it. Smoke happens because of damage to the control panel, and Sabrina puts a bucket over a grunt, and Salem rides off in a horse carriage. Sabrina throws something to cause the horse to freak out, and Salem to get thrown to the sky. Again, slapstick with no shown impact. I would have gotten to thoroughly enjoy the portrayal of him as the villain if I got to see tons of slapstick. Harvey grabbing Salem without getting to hit him returns the world to normal. And Sabrina plays dumb and Harvey tries moving the fridge. Why didn't he get his memory conveniently erased? Oh, spooky sadistic, that's why. But his memory got conveniently erased instantly after he was sent out of the alien spaceship. He's so scared he'd rather play outside than watch the spy movie Quigley was going to get him to watch. So even though they went through a scary experience, it was worth it. He feels better about the spy movie not being released yet, so Spooky Spell got her exactly what she wanted. That's a twist. This agonizingly boring episode rips off James Bond the whole way through, just like Ken Pender's James Bond story, which had the benefit of being in an actual action series where the setting could be anything for all I care, and of being a short story. This took forever, and Sabrina had no reason to trust Spooky to make Harvey's favorite movie come out again sooner. I admit that I did appreciate the interesting things about the episode, like the way the heroes triumphed, and the gadgets. If the goal was always to stop Salem, she would have simply warped Salem to her and grabbed him. The story's written by a better writer than the writers of James Bond films because it references and mocks the cliches of them. But I don't find it interesting because I'm not a James Bond fan. Maybe it'd be a good episode to someone who is. But it's still bad because it only happens to demonize magic and it takes too long. Barely even using magic. Zelda explained the moral of the story that you should let someone put up with disappointment until it passes. But I don't find it convincing, especially since Harvey stopped being disappointed that the spy movie wasn't released yet at the end of the episode. So the spell worked. There was nothing wrong with Sabrina wanting to get a movie released earlier. Oh no, people get money earlier. The only reason Sabrina's plan to use magic backfired was because of Spooky totally disobeying her order and putting her through a scary experience. If he can do that, why does he ever get trusted? Why does he think he can get away with this? Why does he make it rain frogs on the person or something every time instead of giving them what they want, even a little bit? The episode could have been all a dream of Harvey's for all it mattered. This writer didn't want to write a Sabrina story. The most disappointing thing about it is that Sabrina didn't get a real satisfying fight scene with any of the annoying members of her family. I get making Quigley Q, because his name starts with Q. Wouldn't it be cool if he got brainwashed into fighting her by the villain? And it could be explained that Quigley's immune to magic. Why was the slapstick against Salem completely off screen? What's the point of using Sabrina's family then? Sabrina the Animated Series, Episode 65. I'm tortured having to listen to a musician with a bad voice sing in front of bored people at a club Sabrina's at. And blatantly unrealistic people show up that look like monsters. Sabrina and Chloe would know they're vampires. He has his eyes turned red, and Slugloaf says vampire and drops stuff and runs, unrealistically screaming for his mother. Why doesn't Sabrina instantly turn these vampires to stone? They're evil because they're fine with scaring immortals, so they don't want to keep magic a secret. They'd be turned into frogs, and Sabrina would tell Enchantress why she did it if she even found out. I assume the reason Slugloaf is also here is that they're here on a field trip, and since when do people have field trips to a karaoke club at 12? I just don't see the educational value in it. These vampires are good singers, so they deserve the applause. They turn into bats to scare people out of the building, so they wanted to make them happy just to get an ego boost, not because they have empathy. They're friends of Sabrina's aunts from the 1460s, but the way they're dressed reminds me of the 20s. Their hats! We hear some fighting noises, but one of the vampires left Hilda at the altar for another woman, which is why she was mad enough to summon a piano to land on him. And as we were told, she can't kill someone who's already dead. I guess he heals really fast. Why didn't she turn him into an inanimate object if witches aren't spied on? I guess she assumes that if she did something that would kill him, which she could easily do, someone who knew him would file a missing persons report and someone would know to go to Hilda. She's just being paranoid. Zelda tells them Hilda just ordered 6 pizzas with garlic, which scares them, even though that wasn't always the case in vampire fiction. So it's just a wild coincidence that's accurate. Someone says there's no way Hilda will help him do this job. Sabrina was right across the staircase. She would have heard them talking like they want Hilda to commit a crime. It would make sense if she always knew but didn't fear anything because she's got magic. One of them tries to convince Sabrina to go with them to the Netherworld if they have her home by 6. Salem could prevent the plot by running away to tell on her. Instead, he decides to go with her and cheers about it. So for once, it's acknowledged that he's always in on it just to have fun. Sabrina really has no common sense, casually going off with complete strangers she just met today that did nothing but act sociopathic when she first saw them. But again, with someone literally omnipotent, it makes sense that she would take risks easier. A musical number makes me skip ahead, wondering why it's in Sabrina, and the story takes too long to have the ants find out Sabrina is gone. The shower wall is still warm, which is a convenient way to indicate to them that someone just used the shower portal. I never knew that, but it could make sense because you associate light with warmth. It's just that I don't remember that being the case with the other realm closet. Eventually, Salem acts scared of someone, and someone near Sabrina calls him ugly. It's needlessly annoying to have more than one of these vampires in the story, because how am I supposed to refer to them other than rewatching the part of the episode where they say their forgettable names? Then I'd have to figure out where I was, and it's not a good enough show for me to have the incentive to do that, especially when these characters are completely one-dimensional without any sort of distinct personalities among them. The zombie aliens get sent to slowly walk towards them in a half-assed way to intimidate them out of the room for no reason. The vampire says dead Tony stole some of their blood in a blood bank. Why doesn't Sabrina just instantly point to summon the blood? Salem somehow never points out that they could tell Sabrina to warp the blood packs to them. Instead, he asks for help because he's above the guard, and the protagonist sneak past him. I guess he's too slow to chase them. Then why was he hired? I also assume that the zombies aren't infectious. Sabrina somehow decides to try to eat all the garlic, when she should have known she could warp it away. Or at least turn it into something else, like she's done to Gem before. She had plenty of time to think of this. The vampires eventually open the vault. Sure was easy. Pretty sure witches could have technology as advanced as they want. I know this is a zombie's vault, but he could buy it from witches. She burps, and the alarm gets triggered by Salem. So Tony sees camera footage of the burglary. How is he here instead of at home by now? Why would they try a burglary during working hours? The ants hear him say a phone call about this, and Hilda has a little slipping to deal with because the wet mop flies a bit too close to the floor, which it could have easily not had to happen after centuries of experience. Why didn't they instantly warp Sabrina back to them from home? Sabrina warped Enchantress to her. Somehow the ants are intimidated of these vampires, even though they're witches. I have to just assume that they're immune to magic. The ants get framed, and Sabrina sees a convenient breaking news report showing the ants trapped. they would have warped to safety much earlier. Why is the story gonna waste my time with a trial instead of good content padding things out? Whoever wants to see a trial with main characters in it? Hilda lampshading that they have no lawyer makes it obvious that the trial is not worth writing. Sabrina says she can't believe she thought these vampires were cool. Tedium happens, and Sabrina somehow tries to save her aunts the mortal way. She tells them she went with the vampires because of a promise of how nice looking the place she'd be taken to would be, and she takes responsibility, but no one believes her. Eventually the vampires admit that they're the guilty ones. This is forced. What criminals would do this? I guess it's just barely believable because Sabrina's a kid. Gangsters aren't usually known for dealing with kids, for bothering kids. Eventually, one vampire reveals he can sing high enough to break the window and let in sunlight. This is like Twilight, where random vampires have random amazing powers like they're the X-Men. It seems all the more arbitrary to have random people have one random power. Sabrina's being threatened with banishment too, and her garlic breath starts saving the day. It wouldn't travel far enough to save the day, but Chekhov's guns are always good. The bad guys get sent into the portal, and somehow the witches decide to merely run away to escape rather than warp home. If only it was explained that they're out of magic, but they're not because Hilda uses magic here to summon a backpack for the vampires to get into for an escape. It's nice of her not to leave them behind, but since they were portrayed as slimy criminals who'd endanger a 12-year-old, rather than ask one of the witches in the house to summon a sentient being to help them instead, why should I sympathize with them? The story ends with too much time wasted on the vampires singing well again. Goes to show you how much they cared about the show that this is the last episode of the show. The last episode of the show isn't about magic at all, and instead it's Sabrina be unrealistically oblivious to stranger danger and get convinced to follow some clearly evil vampires out of curiosity. This is like a parable against lazy parenting. They constantly don't tell her enough. You'd think that if not her, then one of the many people around her would think to tell her to warp the blood bags to them, instead of them making a risky heist that the ants got framed for because they somehow didn't just warp Sabrina and Salem home. This whole show is written like the worst of bad movies are, where the whole plot wouldn't happen if characters were acting like actual human beings. At least the story doesn't demonize magic, but it's so boring with blatant padding all the time like musical numbers, and the characters being so incompetent just insults my intelligence that I'm not supposed to question it, when even kids would, just from watching a past episode. The whole plot wouldn't happen because Sabrina would have panicked upon seeing the vampires and turned them all into frogs. Or it could have been explained that they're immune to magic. I don't feel like it would be too much of a stretch because in the 70s cartoon, when Sabrina used magic on the monsters, strange things happened. So them being immune to magic outright would be more believable. Why did the ants let themselves get arrested and put through a trial instead of warping home? It should have been explained that they knew that witches would be in the trial, so they just get warped to the courtroom even if they did warp home. I assume the lesson was not to go off with adults you just met, even if one of them has a history with your aunt, who you were told were untrustworthy enough to leave your aunt at the altar and didn't care if they scared people, in a place that you'd think would have security cameras to catch criminals. Why doesn't the story end showing the vampires get arrested by Enchantia for revealing magic to the world? That'd be a great ending to the show as a whole. Too bad Sabrina's Secret Life got released. But at this point I'm thinking, how could it possibly get any worse? Chloe's unnecessary doing almost nothing, so that has to be why she wasn't included in the show. She did nothing that Sabrina couldn't have done. But getting rid of her would be pointless if there's still gonna be the same amount of padding. People still like her for being friends with Sabrina. So how is the marketing that bad? I read that Sabrina's even stupider and meaner in that show. I thought she didn't have stupid and mean moments in the show before that. But they also got rid of shitty characters like Spooky, Quigley, and Gem. So the only problems with the show are the ones that were already in the animated series, except they're made more obvious. It sounds like it makes up for it by getting rid of the shitty characters. I won't argue that it's not a bad show. I'm sure it's still a bad show. I'm just wondering why the people who hate Sabrina's Secret Life think the animated series is a good show.